This is the Tree of Life, Season 16, Chapter 8. In this episode, we will be talking about how three structures, one analog, or substitutionary, and two digital, can create mirroring of individuals in groups. To begin, in the last two episodes, we talked about how affirmational valence reflects the linking of affirmation, as between an analog and a parallel digital structure. In this case, the analog structure comprises two substitutionary impulses, which are substitutionary by context. Impulse 1 is affirmed for person B, and impulse 2 negated. We also talked about how two parallel digital structures exist, one comprising affirmation of impulse 1 and negation of its dialectical impulse by class, the other comprising negation of impulse 2 and affirmation of its dialectical impulse by class. In this arrangement, there is an affirmational valence as it pertains to the first two structures, and negational valence as it pertains to the first and the third. Now, we can imagine that there also exists a person C, in each of these structures, with the same two impulses in each structure. We can say thus, that if the same impulses are affirmed and negated for structure member C, in each parallel structure, then the result will be mirroring as between the parallel behavior of persons B and C. In the opposite case, for person C, in the analog structure, impulse 2 is affirmed and impulse 1 negated, with a corresponding shift in structures 2 and 3. In this case, there is a displacement as between structure members B and C by phase. In the first case, we have parallel action between persons B and C. In the second case, what happens depends upon the nature of the substitutionary impulses in the analog structure. Now, in the last several episodes, we talked about how when the attention is fixed on some attentional object in negation, the result is the conversion of an analog structure to a digital one. Likewise, when the attention is fixed on some bodily cycle or rhythm, the result is negation, which converts a digital structure to an analog one. Looking at the spatial plates described in the complete series, which are the plate of the face, voice, posture, hands and spatial location, when one's attention is fixed on some external object, the result is the creation of tension in the body, manifesting as a particular orientation of those spatial plates. The degree of tension within those plates reflects a string of structures corresponding to the movements of those plates from excitation to relaxation. Now, these movements thus describe in the shifting of attention to the object and back to the plate, the arrangement of a string of digital and then analog structures, which to the extent of the impulses being the same for two parallel individuals within those structures, entail mirroring between parallel behaviors. What we observe thus is that the mirroring of the behavior in question in reference to the particular plate represents the phase alignment and impulse alignment as between two structure members, as well as an affirmational valence with respect to one impulse common in both analog and digital forms, and a negational valence with regards to the other impulse. Since we see that the affirmational valence follows time parsimony, whilst the negational valence follows path parsimony, we see that in the conversion of a digital structure to an analog one, mirroring according to a particular plate represents the limit on the conversion of these plates to an analog structure. Thus, the plate corresponding to mirroring is the plate which separates path parsimony from time parsimony, as the plates below that plate are unable to shift into an analog form. In common language, a series of movements comprise extension and recoil, with the maximum tension being at the furthest extension. As that recoil occurs, the attention becomes fixed on the rhythms themselves, that is, they are self-conscious by need. Consequently, there is a shift of the corresponding digital structures comprising those impulses to analog variants through the negation, which concludes the recoil. However, if there is a concurrent mirroring between the digital structures corresponding to another structure member, this mirroring reflects an affirmational valence. The rhythm ceases to be negated, penetrating only so deep within those movements as the mirrored movement corresponding to the common impulses. In effect, the linking of phase as between two structure members can impair the conversion of that structure to an analog one through negation within the bodily rhythms or cycles. That's the end of the podcast for today.